So my name's Andy, 48 years old.
Wow, you give that out. I would never give my age.
I'm married, 2 kids. I've got a 7-year-old daughter going on 15 and a 3-year-old boy who's like the world is like a big bouncy castle for him type thing. And I write. I write my own stuff. I help write for others, and then I ghostwrite, either in kind of physical products or speeches, stuff like that. And occasionally I will work with organisations to help them with their storytelling, how they get their story out in different ways. So I was wondering how best to do this session, because I have a little thing about these type of sessions where it's very easy to occupy this type of space and you blag it and you come across as the all-knowing kind of being. And there's something very beautiful about honesty, vulnerability, praising the successes but also praising the failures and the mistakes and learning from it. And there's a beautiful tapestry that is created in that process. And so what I want to do for about 15-20 minutes is tell you the story of this thing, but do it in a way that is an honest retelling of how this book came out. And it won't sound authentic at the moment, but hopefully it will sound authentic by the end. This is not a pitch for this book, and you'll understand why I'm saying that at the end. But it's the best way I can be completely honest about this thing. And then we'll just open it up, and we can just have a Q&A dialogue conversation. It doesn't have to be about this thing, it could be about anything else about writing. So does that work?
Yeah.
So this, Paradox, this is the latest thing I've been working on. And it's taken me about, and bear in mind I'm a guy, and I'm trying to do 2 things at once on this, which I'm going to struggle with. But it's taken me about 4 years to work on this, and it's a bit of an experiment. Paradox, as a story, is a reimagination of A Christmas Carol, set in modern day. And I've tried to echo it the same way as how Charles Dickens wrote. Now, Charles Dickens was what we would class as a social commentator. He was a guy who would observe what was happening around him, news stories, events, debates that was happening, and incorporate it into his stories. Every one of his books has that angle. So if you're a reader in Victorian Britain, the way a particular character is described, you as a reader would know, you'd be able to join the dots and realise, oh, that character represents Boris Johnson, for example, or the Brexit debate, or climate change or something. It's like, so there's always those layers in there. And I wanted to play around with that for this book. And the social message in there is that maybe the Dickensian landscape of poverty and injustice is still around today. We just got a different language for it type stuff. Now, when I was thinking about doing this, it's taken 4 years to create this thing, 2 years to write, the 3rd year to test it out to reading groups, get it back, readjust the edit process, decide what to do with this thing, and then the 4th year was getting it produced. And when I was writing this, I wanted to do this different to every other book that I'd done, because every other book was done the typical way of pitch to the agent, lands with somebody, comes out, all that kind of stuff. Going through that process, you realise that you start developing a critique about that industry as well, which we'll kind of touch on as we go on. Because I realised that here I am writing a story that is about social injustice, without bashing people with a head, but about social injustice, the core story is about how we treat one another, how we treat the world and the location around us. But potentially, the way the book gets created and the way the book gets distributed and promoted and printed could be in complete contradiction to the way the story is talking about. So to give you an example, hardback books usually recommend retail prices about 20 quid. The typical price we buy hardback books now from our usual sources of purchasing is about 10 quid. That's the angle of when you start creating the hardback book. You've got to imagine it's going to be selling for 10 quid. Potentially you could get it up to 12 quid depending on certain online stores, but it's 10 quid usually. Depending on the store and the mechanism it gets distributed out, you get a 60%, they take a 60% cut off that. So it's now, your product is now down to 4 quid as a sellable unit. In that 4 quid, you've got to then get it produced, promoted. And so the whole industry, the whole print industry is centered around get it done as cheaply and quickly as possible, because it's all about mass produced content. So the quality of paper is the cheapest way. There might be questionable practice about where it gets printed. So for example, there's a particular online store, if you use their... Is this being filmed?
Yeah, I can edit this out if...
Sweet. So depending on the time of day you buy an Amazon book, if it's on a print-on-demand service, depends on where it gets printed in certain countries. And so there's certain practices around that might be questionable sometimes, and things like that, quality control, and then the way the book gets distributed, are the delivery drivers on a 0-hour contract. So it keeps on going down there because it's all about get this stuff out as quickly and cheaply as possible. And so if you want to do a hardback, the cheapest way of doing it is you find the cheapest print, you outsource the print mechanism process, and then the cover is there's a particular material that pretty much every hardback has, and then you put a dust cover over it. That's the cheapest way of doing a hardback. But when I was thinking through this process, I didn't like the idea that I've got a story that is telling a particular thing, particular passion, but the very mechanism is potentially in contradiction, and I'm feeding into the very system that I'm writing about. And also from a creative edge, it's kind of like, I don't like using templates and being funneled down a particular route. And then as an author, if you're pitching to agents, typically when you go to an agent, the agent will tell you what they're sort of looking for, either on their website or if you're in communication with them. And primarily, that story is that the main publishers have a shed load of data on what their main readership is. And that data will come from some of the main online stores and some of the high street stores. And so they collate this, and potentially within 6 months they could argue that in 6 months' time we predict our reader is going to be a female 40 to 49, they'll like crime fiction with X amount of murders potentially, and this is the type of what we're looking for. And so it's all centered around mass readership. So if you think about it, and so you have a load of these scenarios, and so if you think about it, there's something beautiful about stories. Stories create the world around us. Stories help us interpret one another. Stories help us make sense of the world, who we are, of one another. Stories are important to us. But the way the industry is set and geared, it's all about what sells the most and what can get distributed out the most. And so, as a creative, you're being funneled down a particular small route to get your product out in the typical way. So it's going to be very hard in today's climate for a 1984 Orwell book to land on the shelf, because when that first came out, it didn't really sell well. It wasn't a great pitch. So the experimentation is rare within the mainstream industry. And then finally, if you're in that industry, you realise it's a king with no clothes on. That industry is collapsing around us. So 10, 12 years ago, if you were a bestseller on the Times bestseller list, you probably would have reached about 30% of the population, 35% of the population. If you're a bestseller now, you're probably reaching about 2%. And there'll be some anomalies in that. There'll be the occasional sort of books that just capture a nation. But a bestseller is not a bestseller anymore. And because we buy books very cheaply, and primarily paperbacks you can buy very cheaply in certain supermarkets, there's hardly any money in it from a publisher and also as an author. So as an author, you're encouraged to do book events, try and cram as many people in as possible, and continually pitch your book. And that's where you'll get your usual revenue. And so once I'd finished this, and I was wondering how to do this. I realised this was a moment for me that I could do something different if I wanted to. And so I got a group of people around the table and we kind of just played around with it. And then I just started sitting around with a few people and just imagining, is there a way where the story can craft every part of the process? From how you design the book, how you create it and work with people, how you design it, how you produce it, how you distribute it, and how you promote it, and how you tour it. Can you craft it in such a way that there's an authentic tale that runs through this whole process? And do it that's sustainable and manageable, and you don't have to shift a lot. And to just get a little bit geeky for 2 minutes, imagine a horizontal line, right? Have any of you come across a thing called the long tail? Okay, you've heard the long tail, great. So the long tail is a concept around how ideas spread, how an idea or a product can just capture people's attention. Imagine this horizontal line with a big bump here, and then it kind of fades away here. When you think about your idea or your product, the default is this. You focus upon this big hump here, which is the mass of people. You think about, okay, I've written so from an author's perspective, you think, I've written something. How can I distribute and sell my book to that big hump of people over there? Because that's where I'm going to make the money. The long tail argues that that's a bit of a red herring in your creative process and also in your strategic thinking. Because in that hump, there's a mass of people, and there's a whole load of people probably doing that job better than you and have got a ton more cash than you to do promotion. And it's very hard for you to get your head above the parapet of that noise, because it's just crowded with so many things. And then also, if you're thinking how to appeal to the mass, you shape your product, you shape your talk, you shape everything around the most diluted content possible that will not offend anyone and capture as many people's hearts as possible. But this space over here is where you've got small pockets of people that the long tail argues are the enthusiasts, the group of people who are absolutely passionate about the topic you're writing about, or you as an individual, or the way you've done something, or certain topics that you've got, whatever it is, that these small groups of people have got so much energy and commitment to the cause and what you're doing. And so when you start developing something, instead of focusing on the mass, draw your attention upon those small pockets of people and think about how best can you shape your product, your idea, your writing towards that small group. How do you make it special for them? How do you develop a relationship with them? How do you create a product that is different to the mass, that is individual, that might require a bit of capacity from you initially, but it's special and you're valuing that interaction. It's the way Airbnb first started. You start ticking them off. And so this is how we created this. And to my surprise, it was really cost effective. Because the king with no clothes on narrative is that you have to produce a hardback that is sellable for 10 quid, and potentially it's going to cost you roughly about £3.50, £4 per copy to produce that book. Okay. This book, paper's different, the way it's printed is different. The paper's sustainable. The fabric on it is a silk sustainable fabric, so the touch of it is slightly different to typical hardback books. There's inserts in it, there's a handwritten note. Every time you buy it, handwritten note from me. The way it gets delivered, the packaging of it makes it a little bit different. And this roughly costs me about just over £5.50 for this copy. So it's an extra £1.50 extra for this thing. But it's sellable for 15, 20 quid, so the return on investment is higher. Now the subtleness of that is that it means that I don't need to think about mass selling anymore. I don't need to think about going into a room doing a book event and trying to get 50, 100 people in the room. And usually when authors do a talk, they're pitching because they want you to buy the book, which is lovely that you didn't do that, which is beautiful joy. It's like those events should be about the joy of the story, you know. And so when you start having a mind shift where it's not about mass distribution, it's about the personal thing, you start to reconfigure how you can design, how you can get this book out, how you can use different services to make that interaction with the reader slightly different and make it special, because you're not focused on the mass anymore, you're focused on that small group who really get it. And as you start developing that relationship, they're the ones who are going to be the ambassadors for your book or your idea. They're the ones who are going to start promoting it in a different way, more of a grassroots way. And then when you do events, it means you can be creative with your events. You don't have to do the big book signings anymore. You could do small, intimate things. So my experiment is this year, I've been experimenting with this book in a different way. So for a year now, I've been touring with it. But unlike every other event I've done, where it has been, you get into a big hall, you do your pitch, and then you do a quick book signing. I've been touring where I've been doing dinner parties and small book clubs and just going around people's homes on a dining room table with 8 people, 10 people, a glass of wine, cheese, doing a little presentation about the book, a dramatic presentation like how Dickens would do it, and then opening it up for Q&A and conversations. And it's been, excuse the language, it's been bloody hard work.
Yeah.
But the beauty of it is that compared to everything else that I've done, the comments, the relationship I've had with the reader has been completely different. And it's how the independent music scene works. It's like if you look at how the independent music scene's been developing once they had that music crash as such, and the main industry lost its control as such. The music industry is centred around a concept called 1,000 true fans or 100 true fans. You could use whatever number you want. It's like, imagine what would it be like if you develop something where you are just focused on 100 people, and over a year you're developing a relationship with those 100 people. And at the end of that year, those 100 people will be so committed to you or your product because you're giving them value, whether it's the way the book is designed and there's a personal touch to it, or whether you are sending little news updates out or video messages or whatever, but you're framing it around that, not around the mass. At the end of the year, they will be willing to give you another 10 quid or 20 quid for your next project. And so if you got 100, that's £2,000 straight off. If you then 200 people or 400 people, so you specialise it, and also you start creating a relationship where you're using data in a different way. So you know that if you go to a particular location, you already know because you've got a relationship with X amount of people in that location. And you can just fling them a message saying, hey, I'm going to be there in 2 months' time. Fancy doing something together, and so forth, and it's like that. And that's what I've been experimenting with. And there's been some success, there's been some failures. Everything I've just articulated now, there's some contradictions with it. There's some of the process in this book is not fully ethical because I just couldn't get my head around it at the time. I lose money on post and packaging. So the cheapest way of doing post and packaging is you sign up to an agency that gives you 80% discount off your main distributors, delivery services. But the majority of those delivery services are zero-hour contracts and questionable practices. So the best way of delivery of this product is through Royal Mail. And so I lose £1 every time. But that's fine because the return on investment on the purchase in the book covers all that. And then I purposely, so with the hardback, it's purposely avoiding mainstream distribution. So you can buy it off Amazon, but we purposely make it difficult to do it. Because the whole angle of this book is we want you to try and buy it in a different way and make it more of a personal touch. And so there's different avenues to do that, which if you want quote afterwards we can talk about it if you want. The paperback is a massive contradiction to what I've just articulated. Paperback is done the typical way. With Amazon, it's on the Prime service, print on demand. If you order it, you'll get it the same day. Amazon will print one copy and send it to you. Depending on the time of day, it'll get printed in Poland, Milton Keynes, wherever. And then I use another service called Ingram, who does a print on demand service, which is if you order it from Smiths, it'll be Ingram who will distribute it. And then the publishing house is, we set up a publishing house. And we set up a publishing house because we wanted full control over the ethical breakup of it. And the experiment was on this book with the mindset of if it works and the lessons we learn from it, the sequel to this book will then play around with how to do it with a paperback, how to make it cost effective and ethical with a paperback. And also if other people want to use that service and need any help, then maybe they can draw some of the services off the publishing house in different ways. And the final angle of the publishing house is if you have a publishing house, it means that you've got the door into quite a lot of mainstream organisations and shops. But like I said, you can easily buy the paperback from those places. But the hardback, we deliberately focus upon the niche market. And it's a joy. It's been like I said, it's been hard. But on paper, it looked like it would financially work, and it has financially worked. I think it's given me hope that as an author, you can think differently about getting your product out. That bypasses self-publishing, that bypasses mainstream mass agency routes, and it also gives you freedom to be creative with what you're doing. It feels like you're not selling your soul or putting on clothes that you don't need to put on to sell your product. So that's the rundown of that, really. That's a little spiel. But these sort of spaces are great for opening it up and questions, thoughts, and stuff like that, really. And if that's all done, I can carry on talking, but I think we should open it up.
Well, it must be nice. Must be nice meeting all the people. But how are you organising getting together? It seems a very foreign idea of people saying, "Oh, come to our house." There's 8 of us that can talk to you. How are you getting those contacts? I know you being at the same because they're the tail end. One enthusiast can lead to another enthusiast. Is that what you've been doing? Or?
Yeah, I think one thing I've had to do a mind shift on is to be patient with this thing. So I sat down. So that 4-year process was a really good process for me of creating this, because when I took a year of when it was getting edited, I had a dead space, really, and so I took that time to just sit down with people in the industry and just get their advice. And one of the common things was just be patient. The thing is, when you create a book, there's no real sell-by date with the book. We fall into this trap that we have to kind of get this. We have to do really quick. We have to sell this thing really quickly. We have to do events very quickly and stuff like this. But have a mindset that you're in this thing for 3, 4, 5 years. You can keep on plugging this thing for 5 years if you want. And if you're developing something, be patient with it. And if you're not having to get numbers in very quickly, you can just be slow with this process. And so about trying to hook into those dinner clubs was realising that there's networks out there where there's book clubs who are really interested in having an author come for a glass of wine. Because it never happens, because authors don't normally go to a room full of 4 people, because it makes no financial sense for the author to do that, because it's all about the mass pitch. But the refreshing nature of having an author go to that house and then not got, hey, buy this book type thing. It's like, no, let's just talk about it. People engage with the book in 2 ways. Either they like the content of it, or don't like the content of it, or they love how the book was created. Do
you find them buying the book though because they feel embarrassed that you've turned up? It's like someone
saying
myself, whether you talk about it or not.
I went through a mind shift, and it was a hard mind shift of, I think it was probably 3 months into it, where I started gauging the success of those events through how many books I sold. So I went back into that default. So I went into a couple of those dinner party events where nobody bought the book at all, even though they loved it. They loved the concept.
Wow.
Or I went into one book club where they'd already bought the book but through Amazon on a paperback. It's just like, it's like, and then there was other book clubs where everyone bought the book. And I would do discounts if you wanted to buy the book there and then and all that kind of stuff. And then I started gauging, the successful events were the ones where he sold the books, and he's catching himself and thinking, no, this is not what this thing is about. This is not about the book sale. It's about developing the relationship with the people in this room. And how I gauge the success is about what is the communication post that event. So if I'm still in contact with those people, regardless of whether they've got my book or not, and we're talking about stuff or encouraging about their writing process, that's my success. And that has been a massive, I've seen more interaction doing it this way than doing a room full of 100 people and doing the typical sort of the 10-second book signing and buy. I haven't got your name anymore in my head. And that's been great. And the ripple effect is that somebody in the room says, "Oh, actually, I've got a group of friends. Do you fancy coming around my house? Do your little dramatic."
Is that converting to sales? At the end of the day, you've got to pay for your petrol, your time.
Yeah,
and everything as well,
so it's been trial and error, and so I'm 10 months into it now. This tour, it's called the Sketches Tour, and how I've made it work is that I've made sure that I've done other stuff in that location as well, if possible. So if I'm going to, so I was in Edinburgh, if I had to get to Edinburgh and Manchester, I made sure that I had other things to do, that I could try and get some income in, or some way of, so again it's massive contradictions. It's like, so when I did the Manchester gig, I made sure that I did another gig that covered my cost. That was a bit of selling my soul a bit.
Right.
But it's the thing of,
That's because you've got other work that kind of fits in.
Yeah, and it's incompleteness and contradiction. So this is not perfect. This model is not perfect yet. But it was never meant to be perfect. It's about, look, as an author, you're encouraged to either sell your soul to that agency and write in a particular way that might not fit, or if you want to go it alone, even though there's some very beautiful tools out there, you have to manipulate them. If you want to really make a success on Amazon, you have to manipulate that system, and they give you the tools to do it. And the way you can do certain keywords, the way you do your blurb, the way you enter a room, if you do an event, the way you design, it's all manipulation.
Showmanship.
Yeah, and it's like, sometimes that can be disheartening for authors, because it's not who you are. Or you've got a system that tells you to do it in a particular template, and then you've only sold 5. And then you think your product's not worth it, or you're not worth it. And it's like, that's wrong. This is wrong. It's beautiful, the product you have.
I think the thing that comes through is when you've had the good reviews from people you don't know, and you get the bad reviews.
Yeah.
Of course, because it's got the taste. It is those different things, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's the feedback.
So to the target, you're looking at this in almost in a non-targeted way that one would have with any other commercial product, which is, if I do this, certainly as mainstream income and not as an interesting hobby, I need to sell this much, bring this much in to justify it, or back to working in Tesco's or whatever. But the way you're approaching this, without having that hard line, I must do what is necessary to sell 500 or to make this much for each copy, irrespective of how it's produced.
Yeah.
I mean, what you're talking about here is it's not just about books. This is the whole kind of commercial model. Really. I mean, it's not many miles away from how people talk about buying fashion or CDs or food come to that. Because so does that mean that you kind of consciously step back from having a target number of sales or return?
Yeah.
You must have that figure in your head to start with. You must say,
absolutely.
If I don't sell this many, then basically,
Yeah.
Commercially at least, it's not working.
So from a publishing perspective, from a publishing house perspective, there is a number that is there that knows that you need to sell X amount of these books
What is
and
that
the
number?
cover.
You got some, just curiosity.
Yeah.
Got no idea how many books sell, not being in the
Yeah.
business at all.
So, and this was the biggest surprise, a bespoke print, done differently, you only have to sell 350 copies of it, and it's covered on all fronts, which is unreal. So every other book that I've done, there's been a different mechanism of making a living from it, and this gives enough evidence, I think, for me and the other folk that actually, yeah, there is a different way of doing this thing. There is a different way of doing this thing. Yeah.
I think it's much lower number than I would have expected.
Yeah, absolutely.
And again, being outside the business, all you ever see in Smiths is, millions, blah.
Yeah.
And certainly you think
And it
must
is
be four
that-
figures.
And it is that downside of when you think about if you're focusing upon that mass distribution and you're using the certain modes of getting that book out, and then having to use that percentage breakdown like the Amazon thing of the 60% cut, the Smiths, which is just slightly lower, Waterstones is just slightly lower. If you want your product on the shelf in a particular way, you have to pay a certain mechanism, that kind of stuff. If you think, okay, so the paperback is all in that system, right? But the hardback is like, okay, let's buck that. Let's think about how do you create something that is worth not the sale, the general 10 quid hardback, because that's how we typically buy our hardbacks now. It's like this book is worth 20 quid. This interaction is worth 20 quid. And this book normally sells for about 17 quid. In book clubs it will sell for 15 quid. But the money I make per copy on this book is vastly different to how the hardback would have, the royalty I would have got from this hardback if it was done typical 10 quid route. Even though the retail price would have been 18 quid, there's no way people would buy a hardback for 18 quid unless you're independent bookshops. So it's the bespoke, and it's not a new model. It's basically how independent music scene works. And if you do your research on publishing now, it is that thing. It is an industry with king with no clothes on. There's enough experiments taking place now that gives you the hint that there's a different landscape starting to emerge within this industry. And maybe in 5-10 years' time, it will stick its head above the parapet. There's a number of services now that you as an author can tap into. You don't have to do it the way I did it. But you can start adapting your practice where you can have a product at the end of the day that feels authentic to who you are, your story, and how you're going to get it out. You don't have to feel like you have to do book events or book signings, or you can craft the way that book gets out to reflect who you are and what your story is.
May I ask a question? Have you read the book *Sapiens*?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Because
Great.
what I took from the book is that as a species, story is who we are, because it's what our language defines who we are. We live individual stories, we live collective stories, momentary stories, larger distances. So I asked you a wordsmith that your material that you wrote into the craft. And
That's very kind of you, but
if you're talking about a tapestry, that's material you use, as I hear it when you're speaking, it's obviously very important to you, and how you craft your piece of art, what you're giving out. This is something that you've worked on, it's very important to you. here that there's a sort of level of moral purity that you're trying to work towards, not only in creating the story, but how it's distributed and received. And so that's really
Thank you.
interesting, quite fascinating.
Now I'm really passionate about, so yeah, I passionately believe in stories. You know, that thing of the stories create the world, how we interpret one another, the stories we hold on to, the stories that we're always telling stories in our head.
Mm-hmm.
And even in the room when we ask the person, what do you do?
Mm.
The response is the story. That we either then determine, do I really want to talk to you or not? Are you important? Are you not important? Type of thing. And then we're always encouraged to blag it, make ourselves bigger than who we are, all that kind of stuff. Authors are great at that. And so stories, how the stories impact us. And so even how we've created that book, how you create the book, how you get it out, how you tell people about it, is important because it is going to impact that individual's life in a particular way. So yeah.
Because the way you're distributing it, it's that level of connection that you want. It's almost going back to our ancestry with sitting around the fire and having the storytelling and the hugely important oral traditions.